The best way to use effects like autotune to process your vocals live is to get a universal audio interface. But I have a question for you. What happens if this interface goes down? Do you continue to hear your affected and auto-tuned vocals? And most importantly, does your audience hear your vocals at all? Well, if not, you need a backup plan, because hope is not a good backup plan. And in this video, I'm going to share the exact gear that you need to purchase to create a redundant vocal processing rig. Now, like I mentioned up front, the best way to do low latency real-time processing of vocals, or really anything, is to use a universal audio interface. And the reason why is all the processing happens on the interface. It has nothing to do with your computer. And that really helps for two reasons. Number one, it allows my computer to be dedicated to running tracks or maybe processing key sounds live, as opposed to doing all that plus processing vocals. So the CPU of my computer is freed up to focus on one thing, and one thing only. The second thing, and maybe more importantly, is because all the processing happens on the interface, it means that it's going to be low latency and it's going to be real time. Essentially, this is just like using an audio console and adding reverb on your audio console. You don't experience latency on your vocals. What you do, but it's so low that you can't tell. Alternatively, you can go buy a low latency audio interface. You can even use a universal audio interface, plug your mic into it, process it in Ableton Live and send it back out. But you're introducing latency into your computer, introducing latency with the plugin, and introducing latency on the way out. So again, if your interface is low latency enough, you can maybe get around and get away with that. But the benefit of doing it this way and processing solely on this is my computer's CPU is completely freed up. Plus, again, it's going to be low latency in real time. But the question is, what happens if this goes down? So the best solution is to have a completely identical setup and another interface. But it doesn't just stop there. To really truly have redundant vocal processing, there's a couple extra pieces of gear we need. Plus, you need to follow what I call the 3 S's of redundancy. Any redundant system follows this process, and I'm going to share the exact gear list you need, give you a quick introduction on what that gear is, and share the 3 S's of redundancy. So starting at the top, you're going to need completely identical setup. So if you have a MacBook Pro processing vocals, that you're running tracks on, processing vocals using a universal audio interface, you're going to need another computer with the same exact interface. So most importantly at the beginning, it's the power of 2, right? We're going to need one computer that has console loaded on it. If you're unfamiliar with universal audio, this is what console looks like. Again, the thing I want to stress here is console is not processing vocals. It is controlling my hardware device, which is processing vocals. But it has to be ran on some computer so that I can access and change presets and get control over my universal audio interface. So we're going to have a computer that has console running on it. We have our universal audio interface. Hopefully you already know how to set this up. If not, I'll link to a course where I show you exactly how to do that. Then again, we need a completely redundant dual setup, another computer running console that's controlling a separate interface. Again, the same exact interface, okay? Now, let's get into the 3 S's of redundancy. So like I mentioned, we've got 2 identical setups. We've got both of our interfaces set up here. Let's talk about the 3 S's of redundancy. The first S is split. We need to split our mic signal. The absolute hands down best way to do that is a Radial JS-3 mic splitter. You can see this has one input here. We could plug our microphone into this. We get a through that we could go and connect directly to our soundboard that could be like a safety that has no processing whatsoever, but it's just a safety output. But then the real secret sauce here are these 2 outputs. So we're going to connect one output to our first interface. We're going to connect the other output to our other interface here. So the first piece of gear that we need that's not our dual setup for an interface is the Radial JS-3 mic splitter. We're going to split our signal. Now the second piece of this, and the second S of the 3 S's of redundancy, is sync. We need a way to make sure both of our systems are perfectly in sync. And this maybe is going to feel like kind of an odd choice, a random thing to throw out there, but I think the absolute best way to sync 2 systems is to use the Play Audio 12 from iConnectivity. And here's why. What we're going to do is we're going to connect this to our first computer, connect this to our second computer, and we're going to use this interface for all of our tracks. Whether we're doing key stuff, track stuff, whatever it is, all of those outputs from Ableton Live are going to come from this. But the real power of this setup and where the sync comes in is we're going to connect a MIDI controller to our host port, which is going to go to both computers. And again, on both of our computers, we have Universal Audio's console software running. I would also suggest an additional thing you should check out is the UA MIDI Control app, which is going to allow you to control any and every setting in console. There's some other great plugins like Tune Live from Strange Electronic that allow you just to control autotune, which is really, really helpful if you're just using autotune. But if you want control fully over console, I would suggest checking out UA MIDI Control. It's a really, really great solution. So at this point, two systems, both using universal audio interfaces, both have console installed on them. Both of them have UA MIDI Control. We're sending MIDI from Ableton Live to UA MIDI Control to control those systems. We're keeping them both perfectly in sync because when I press play on my MIDI controller connected to the host port, it presses play to both machines. When I hit next locator to go to the next song, it goes to both computers at the same time. And when I press stop, it stops both computers at the same time, right? So we have split with the Radial JS-3. We have sync with the Play Audio 12. The third and final S of a redundant system is we need a switcher. We need a way to switch outputs from our interfaces. So let's talk about how we would normally do this. So normally to get vocals out of our universal audio interface, we have two outputs on our interface here. That could be, if we were processing a stereo signal, we could use both of those. If we were processing two separate vocals at once, then we could say, okay, this is vocal 1, this is vocal 2. Normally our mic would go in here and then they would come out of the outputs, you know, end of day, simple, real easy setup to make happen. But in a redundant system, we actually are doubling the amount of outputs we have, right? So we've split our signal to both of our interfaces here. We're using our Radial JS-3 to go in and end, processing at the same time. And then we need to take both sets of outputs at the same time. Where do they go? They don't go to our soundboard because we don't want to burden the sound engineer with going, oh, I lost our vocal. I think it's the backup one. What channel is that? And unmute. We want it to be as close to being an instant process as possible. So the way that we switch, the way that I would suggest switching to analog outputs is using the Backtrack, another great piece of gear from Radial, by Radial Engineering. The way this works is we would take the outputs of interface A and go into here. And if we were using stereo, then we would go left and right for interface A, and we take the outputs from interface B into input B, left and then right. If we were doing stereo, just mono, we would just do one. And then we would send our outputs from the Backtrack here. Again, if we're processing just vocal, we can do left, left, and our output would come out of left out. If we're doing stereo signals, then again, stereo signal here, stereo signal here. Now, what's great about this is that means I can only hear input A or input B one at a time. But let's say that we need to switch between those. So how do we say, oh, you're hearing one or you're hearing the other? Well, you press the input select on the front. Now that's easy, simple enough, but there's nothing more rock star than having a Backtrack attached to your belt buckle, singing and in the middle going, oh, I lost my vocal, and pressing a button, right? It doesn't look very cool. So how do we switch this remotely as opposed to using the front panel? Well, again, yet another great piece of radio gear comes into the picture here. This is the JR2 remote foot switch. What we can do is we can connect this foot switch into the Backtrack. In fact, if we turn this around, you'll see JR2 input listed here on the back of our foot switch. So we can go directly out of our JR2 remote into our JR2 input here, and we can switch between channel A and channel B. And we could also mute it as well too if we wanted. And we can monitor our signal even with our output muted. There's some other great features on this box that are really, really great, but that's how we can split our signal to two different interfaces. We can take those switcher outputs, go to our Backtrack, and again, how we can achieve split by using the Radial JS-3, by achieving sync by using UA MIDI Control and a Play Audio 12 to make sure MIDI signals go into both machines being synchronized at the same exact time, same exact MIDI presets, vocal presets happening at the same time. And then 3, that's how we can switch individual outputs from both of those interfaces at the same time. Now from there, you may have questions like, what do we do if I have more than 2 inputs? What if I'm processing multiple vocals at the same time? What do I do? Well, you can take those same 3 S's of redundancy and scale them up to even a larger scale. And you may be going, Will, this is great. I love that you gave this gear list, which I've linked the gear list in the description below, but how do I actually set all this up? Well, I've created a course where I show you step by step exactly how to set this up from scratch. Plus, like I teased at the beginning, if you're unsure how to set up and use UA MIDI Control, how to use console to control a universal audio interface, I have a course where I show you how to set up real-time vocal processing using universal audio interfaces. And then once you get that down, you can go and check out my redundant real-time vocal processing with universal audio interfaces. So you don't have to be left to try to figure it out on your own. You're more than welcome to spend hours and hours trying to guess at how to connect all these pieces to figure out how to do this. But save yourself the time, save yourself the money, become a From Studio to Stage student, get access to those courses, plus over 60 other courses, a really incredible active community of students that are on the same path you are, plus exclusive student discounts, like you can qualify for EDU pricing on Ableton Live. You get a monthly call that's just for students, plus 200 credits that you can use in the shop every single month to purchase something for free. So many incredible benefits. To become a student, to get access to those courses, plus all those other benefits, all you have to do is head to fromstudiotostage.com/subscribe. That's fromstudiotostage.com/subscribe. You can click the link in the description of this video to head directly there. And if you're not ready for that quite yet, then the second best thing you can do is subscribe to this YouTube channel completely free. Enable the bell icon so you don't miss when I post new content. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.